Hello everyone, and welcome back to Unsaid Hours. I know many of you listen to these stories to relax and slowly fall asleep. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight. If you enjoy these stories, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now get comfortable, take a deep breath, and let's begin. The storm had been building since early afternoon, the kind that starts harmless and almost pretty, a thin dusting that softens hard edges and makes everything look clean. By 3 o'clock the flakes had thickened, and by 5 the sky had turned the color of dirty cotton. The wind came in sharp gusts that rattled bare branches and pushed snow sideways. By the time the sun went down, it wasn't really snowing anymore so much as the whole world was moving in white. Streetlights across the neighborhood glowed like blurred coins. The road in front of the house vanished under a smooth layer that kept filling in every time a gust scraped it away. Inside the house, though, it felt safe in a way that almost seemed unfair. The furnace hummed and clicked like it always did, steady and reliable, pushing warm air through the vents. The living room smelled faintly like buttery popcorn, and the lemon cleaner Alara had used earlier on the counters. The windows were tight, the doors were heavy, and the thick walls made the storm feel far away, like something happening on a screen instead of right outside. Alara was 20 years old. She liked being alone sometimes. It felt like freedom, like having the world to herself, without anyone watching or asking questions. Her parents had gone to the city for the weekend to visit her aunt and see a show. They left her in charge of the big suburban house and reminded her to keep the doors locked. So not because they thought their neighborhood was dangerous, but because that was what you said before leaving someone alone in winter. When they first left, she enjoyed it. She turned her music up louder than her mom liked. She cooked a dinner that was basically just appetizers and snacks, then ate them in front of the TV like she was on vacation. She wandered from room to room without having to explain why. She even stood for a while in front of the sliding glass doors to watch the snow start stacking up on the patio railing, finding a strange beauty in the way the weather erased the yard. By 10 o'clock, the freedom started to feel different. It wasn't that she was scared. It was that the house was too quiet. The storm made everything outside look like nothing, just white and gray and moving. It was the kind of night that made a person want to burrow under blankets, watch something silly, and pretend the world was small and controlled. She settled into the oversized beige sectional in the living room with a heavy wool blanket and a bowl of popcorn. The couch was big enough to sleep on easily, and she stretched out sideways, legs tucked under her, shoulders warmed by the blanket. The living room was the kind of room her parents were proud of. High ceilings, clean lines, and that one wall that was mostly glass. Sliding doors ran almost the entire length, looking out onto the backyard and the patio. In summer, it was beautiful. In winter daylight, it was still pretty, but at night, especially on a storm night, that huge sheet of glass turned into a dark mirror. If the room lights were on, you saw yourself. If the lights were off, you saw nothing outside, only the reflection of the living room floating in blackness. Alara turned off the overhead lights to reduce glare on the TV, leaving only the flickering blue glow of the movie and a small lamp in the hallway to keep the house from feeling completely dark. The lamp made a soft pool of light that didn't reach the corners. The rest of the room stayed dim, comfortable, like a place meant for sleeping. She picked a romantic comedy because she didn't want anything scary. She didn't want suspense. She didn't want a soundtrack that made the wind outside feel like footsteps. She wanted something light, something that made her laugh, something that kept her mind from wandering. For a while, it worked. The movie played. The characters said predictable lines. Alara ate popcorn and let herself sink into the couch cushions. The storm continued outside. Wind howled in slow bursts that made the house groan. Sometimes a gust pushed hard enough to make the siding creak like someone dragging a fingernail along the wall. The chimney whistled now and then, a thin, high sound that cut through the dialogue on screen. She pulled the blanket higher and tried to ignore it. Houses made noises, storms made noises. It was normal. About 30 minutes into the movie, she felt an urge to check the weather again. Not because she needed to, but because she wanted reassurance. She picked up her phone and glanced at the forecast. It was the same as before. Blizzard warning, heavy accumulation, low visibility, stay off the roads. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mom earlier saying they'd arrived safe. Another from her dad reminding her to keep the garage door shut so the pipes didn't freeze. She replied with a thumbs up and put the phone down on the cushion beside her. Then she turned her head to the left, toward the sliding glass doors. She wasn't expecting to see much. The yard was a blank white field under darkness. The patio furniture was covered, only rounded shapes. Snow blew in sheets. At first, she thought she saw the reflection of her own face on the glass. Then the angle changed, and she saw something that didn't match. A face, not her face. A face in the glass, close to the door, pale and floating in the weak blue light from the television. For a second, her brain refused to accept it. It felt like her mind snapped between frames, like she had missed a piece of the scene and couldn't catch up. The face was a man's face. He was standing right on the other side of the glass, staring directly at her. The TV light washed over his features in a cold, sick color, turning his skin gray and making the shadows under his eyes look deeper. He wore a dark hoodie with the hood pulled up. Everything about him blended into the night except that face. And he was smiling. Not a friendly smile, not even a normal smile. It was too wide, too stretched, teeth showing in a way that looked wrong, like his mouth was doing something his eyes didn't agree with. His eyes were fixed on her with a stillness that felt heavy, like pressure on her chest. He didn't knock, he didn't wave, he didn't do the simple human thing of making a normal gesture that would explain why he was there. He just stared and smiled. Alara's first instinct was disbelief. Her mind threw out quick explanations the way people do when something terrifying appears without warning. A neighbor, someone whose car slid off the road, someone needing help. But if you need help in a blizzard, you look desperate, you look cold, you look like you might die if someone doesn't open the door. You don't stand there motionless with a smile that looks like it was practiced. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. The fear was too sudden, too complete. Her heart started pounding so hard she could hear it. She sat frozen on the couch, eyes locked on the face outside. Seconds passed, maybe more. The smile didn't change. The man didn't blink. He didn't shift his weight. He didn't fog the glass with breath. The storm outside blurred into nothing around him, but he stayed perfectly clear in that narrow strip of light. Finally, the paralysis broke. A strangled sound escaped her, half gasp, half scream. She scrambled backward on the couch cushions, knocking the popcorn bowl off her lap. Kernels scattered across the carpet. She didn't even notice. Her mind had narrowed to a single thought. He can see me. She grabbed her phone off the cushion with shaking fingers. Her eyes flicked back to the glass. He was still there, still smiling. The glass felt suddenly thin. The sliding door lock felt meaningless. She imagined him lifting something heavy from the patio and slamming it through. She imagined the sound of shattering glass, the cold air rushing in, him stepping inside without hurry. She needed help, but she also felt sure that if she stood up and ran, if she made too much movement, it would trigger something in him, like an animal, like a person who had been waiting for prey to make the wrong move. So she did something that later she would feel almost embarrassed about until she realized it might have saved her. She yanked the heavy wool blanket up and over her head and curled into a tight ball on the couch. It was the kind of thing a child would do hiding from something under the bed. It didn't make logical sense, but fear isn't logical. The blanket gave her the smallest feeling of being less visible. Under the blanket, the air was hot and stale immediately. It smelled like fabric softener and dust and her own sweat. The darkness was close and suffocating. She could hear the storm louder now because she had blocked out the room. The wind sounded like it was scraping at the house. Her phone screen lit up under the blanket, too bright. She dimmed it quickly, terrified the glow would show through. Her hands shook so badly she missed the buttons the first time. 911 call. The ringing felt endless. Each second stretched until it became painful. She held her breath, listening for any sound from the room beyond the blanket. Glass breaking, a door sliding, footsteps. Nothing but wind and the distant creak of the house. Then a calm voice came through the phone. 911, what is your emergency? There's a man, Alara whispered. Her voice barely worked. Tears slid down her cheeks and into her hairline. He's looking in my glass door. He's on my patio. Please help me. I need you to speak up just a little, the operator said, steady but alert. Did you say there is an intruder at your home? Yes, Alara hissed, forcing the word out. He's right at the sliding door. He's staring at me. He's smiling. I'm alone. Okay, the operator said. I have your location as 42 Oakwood Drive. Is that correct? Yes. Yes. Officers are on the way, the operator said, and that sentence alone made Alara's chest loosen by a fraction. Stay on the line with me. Are you able to get to a locked room? I can't move, Alara whispered. I'm hiding under a blanket on the couch. If I move, he'll see me. He's right there. Okay, don't move if you feel unsafe, the operator said. Do you hear him trying to get in? Any banging or glass breaking? Alara listened hard. The storm screamed against the house. The furnace kicked on. Somewhere a vent ticked as it expanded. I don't know, she whispered. The wind is so loud. I think he's just watching. All right, the operator said. They're close. You're doing the right thing. Stay covered. Stay quiet. I'm right here. Under the blanket, time became a strange, miserable thing. Without seeing the room, her mind filled in every possibility. She pictured the man outside shifting closer, lifting his hands, pressing his face to the glass. She pictured him walking away, then coming around to the front door. She pictured him already inside without her knowing, because fear will create doors where there are none. She clutched the phone so tightly her fingers hurt. The operator's voice, calm and constant, became the only thing anchoring her to reality. At some point she realized she was quietly praying, not with words she had learned in church, but with desperate thoughts sent upward to anything that might listen. Please let them get here. Please let the door hold. Please let him go away. They're pulling up now, the operator said suddenly. Do you see lights? Alara didn't dare peek. I can't look. That's okay, stay covered. Do not move until they identify themselves. A moment later, a new sound cut through everything. Not wind, not the house creaking, hard, heavy pounding on the front door. Police! Is anyone inside? Relief hit Alara so fast her body went weak. She threw the blanket off and sucked in air like she'd been underwater. Her skin was damp with sweat under the wool. The room felt freezing now. Blue and red light flashed through the front windows, turning the living room into flickering color. The strobing made the shadows jump. For an instant, she couldn't tell what was real and what was light. She staggered to her feet, legs shaking, and ran to the front door. Her fingers slipped on the deadbolt at first. She fumbled, cursed, tried again. And finally the lock clicked. She yanked the door open. 2 officers stood on the porch with snow swirling around them. They looked huge in their winter coats, hats pulled low, faces tight with focus. A patrol car sat in the driveway with lights flashing, barely visible through the blowing snow. "Oh my God," Alara gasped. "Thank you." The taller officer, a man with a gray mustache and tired eyes, guided her back inside gently, putting himself between her and the open door so cold air didn't rush in. "It's all right," he said. "I'm Officer Miller. This is Officer Hernandez. Are you alone in the house?" "Yes," Alara said. Her voice shook. "I saw him at the back door, the sliding glass door." Hernandez, younger, with sharp eyes that didn't miss details, was already moving. "Miller, stay with her," she said. "I'm checking the perimeter back first." Alara watched her go. I watched the officer's shape disappear into the storm through the side of the house. Officer Miller stepped into the living room and did a quick scan, his eyes moving over doorways, corners, the hallway, like he was mentally mapping escape routes. He asked simple questions, grounding ones. "Did you lock the doors? When did you see him? Was the sliding door locked? Did you hear anything else?" Alara answered as best she could. She pointed shakily toward the glass wall. He was right there," she said. "Right there. He was smiling at me. It was wrong." Miller nodded, but his eyes stayed alert. "Okay," he said. "Stay here. Do not go near the glass." From the sliding door, Alara could see Hernandez's flashlight beam sweeping across the backyard. The bright white light cut through swirling flakes and made the snow sparkle. The beam jerked left and right, quick and searching, moving over the patio, the fence line, the corner of the yard. It looked like a spotlight from a helicopter in a movie, only smaller and more personal. Minutes passed. Alara's breathing slowed enough that she could feel how badly she was shaking. Her blanket was still on the couch. Popcorn lay scattered on the carpet like tiny pale stones. Finally, the back door handle rattled and Hernandez knocked hard on the glass. Miller slid the door open just enough to let her in. A gust of cold air rushed into the room, carrying fine snow that melted the moment it touched carpet. Hernandez stepped inside, stomping snow off her boots. Her face looked confused in a way that made Alara's stomach sink. "Miss," Hernandez said, looking at Alara carefully, "are you sure about what you saw?" "Yes," Alara snapped, sudden anger flaring through fear. "Of course I'm sure. He was right there. I saw his face. I saw his teeth." Hernandez held up a hand, not dismissing but calming. "Okay, I hear you," she said. "But the patio outside is covered. There's 6 inches of fresh snow. It's smooth. There are no footprints, not one. If a person had stood at that door, there would be tracks." Alara felt like the floor tilted. "That's impossible," she whispered. "I'm not making it up." Miller's voice softened. "We're not saying you're making it up," he said. "But sometimes reflections, fear, the TV light, it can play tricks." "It wasn't a trick," Alara said, and her voice broke. He was smiling at me." The officers exchanged a look. It wasn't cruel, it wasn't mocking. It was the look of people who had seen frightened callers before. The look of professionals trying to decide how much reassurance and how much reality a person could handle. Miller sighed. "We'll do another sweep," he said. "Property line, garage side, front yard. But right now it looks like no one is outside." Hernandez nodded, but she didn't look satisfied. She stepped toward the sliding door again and crouched to check the lock, shining her flashlight down at the latch. The beam moved across the metal track and the bottom edge of the door. Then she stopped. Her whole body went still, like someone had grabbed her spine. "Miller," she said. Miller turned immediately. "What?" Hernandez didn't answer right away. She swept the flashlight beam slowly across the living room carpet, moving it from the sliding door inward. The harsh white light showed details the dim room hid. Small marks, darker patches, tiny bits of melted snow. The snow outside is untouched, Hernandez said slowly, but the floor inside isn't. Alara's mouth went dry. She followed the beam with her eyes. There, in the light, were wet boot prints, large ones, heavy ones, dark patches soaked into the cream-colored carpet. They weren't random splashes, they were clear impressions, heel, tread, dal toe, like someone had walked through snow and then across her living room. The prints formed a path, and the path didn't start at the front door where the officers had entered. It started near the back hallway that led to the garage door, the secondary entry, the one her dad always locked, the one Alara used when bringing groceries in from the car. The trail crossed the living room and then it stopped, right behind the couch, right behind where Alara had been sitting. The room went silent in a way the storm couldn't touch. Alara felt the blood drain from her face. Her hands went numb. She stared at the last wet print, inches from the edge of the couch, as if her eyes could change what it meant if she looked hard enough. Miller's hand dropped to his holster. His voice sharpened instantly. No softness left. "Clear the house," he said. "Now." Hernandez moved fast, gun drawn, cutting toward the kitchen and the hallway, flashlight sweeping ahead of her. Miller turned to Alara, eyes wide now, not with pity, but with a kind of shock he couldn't hide. "Miss," he said carefully, "did you lock the door between the garage and the house?" Alara tried to think. Her mind was buzzing. She remembered coming in earlier with groceries, arms full, snow on her boots. She remembered pushing the door shut with her hip because her hands were occupied. She remembered meaning to lock it. She always meant to lock it, had she? I don't know," she whispered. And the shame in her voice was almost as strong as the fear. Miller looked at the footprints behind the couch again. Then he looked at the sliding glass door, the big black mirror of it. He looked at the angle between the couch and the glass, the way the TV light would reflect. His face changed. It wasn't relief. It wasn't comfort. It was the look a person gets when they realize something was worse than they thought. And the only reason you're still alive is because you didn't turn your head at the wrong time. "You are very lucky," he said. Alara couldn't swallow. "Why?" she breathed. "You said there were no footprints outside." "There aren't," Miller said. His voice dropped, lower now, like he didn't want the house itself to hear. He pointed to the untouched patio beyond the glass. "Because the man wasn't outside, miss. He didn't come up through the yard." Alara stared at him, not understanding, and not wanting to. Miller nodded toward the end of the footprint trail. "Those prints stopped behind your couch," he said, "right where you were sitting." Alara's heart slowed in a horrible way, as if her body was bracing for impact. "You saw his face in the glass," Miller said. "You thought he was on the patio because that's where the glass looks out." Alara turned slowly toward the sliding door. The outside was black and snow-filled. The glass reflected the room like a faint ghost image. The couch, the TV glow, the lamp in the hallway. Miller kept his voice steady, but it trembled at the edges. "What you saw wasn't him looking in from outside," he said. "It was his reflection. He was standing behind you, looking at you in the glass." For a second, Alara couldn't breathe at all. Her mind raced backward through the last hour, through every moment on the couch. The way the room felt too still, the odd pressure in the air. The times she thought the wind sounded like breathing, the tiny urge she'd had to glance behind her, and the way she'd ignored it because she didn't want to be scared. She pictured it now, the man behind her in the dim living room, close enough that he could have touched her hair, close enough that she would have felt his warmth if he'd leaned in, close enough that her neck would have been exposed. And she understood, with sick clarity, why the smile had been so wrong. He hadn't been smiling because he was outside trying to scare her. He had been smiling because she didn't know he was already inside. Because for him, it wasn't a question of getting in. It was a question of how long he could stand there and watch her, waiting for the moment she finally turned around. From down the hall, Hernandez called out sharp and urgent, "Miller, garage doors open." Alara flinched hard. Miller's jaw tightened. Hernandez returned quickly, flashlight beam jumping. Her face had changed too, stripped of skepticism. "The door from the garage to the hallway wasn't deadbolted," she said, "and the garage side door is cracked. Snow drifted inside. Someone came through there." Alara's knees gave out and she sank onto the couch, hands gripping the edge so hard her knuckles went white. Her blanket lay beside her like a shed skin. She could almost feel where his boots would have been, on the carpet behind her, the wetness soaking in. Miller spoke into his radio, giving quick details, requesting more units, describing a possible suspect, describing the blizzard and the lack of visibility. The words washed over Alara, not quite connecting. All she could see was the glass door and the reflection she had trusted more than her own instincts. Hernandez walked to the back of the couch and crouched, shining her light on the carpet. "He stood here," she murmured mostly to herself. For a while, Alara's throat tightened. "How do you know?" Hernandez pointed with the flashlight. The wetness was darker there, deeper, not just a step, not just a pass-through, a pooled patch, as if someone had planted their boots and waited long enough for snow to melt off them and soak into the carpet. Alara covered her mouth with her hand to keep from making a sound she couldn't take back. Her stomach rolled. Miller approached her slowly, keeping his eyes on the hallway as he spoke. "Listen to me," he said. "We're going to stay here until backup arrives. Then we're going to do another full sweep. You're not going upstairs. You're not going anywhere alone. Do you understand?" Alara nodded, but it felt meaningless. She couldn't stop imagining the moment she had turned her head and seen him. She had thought he was outside. She had believed the door between them meant something. She had covered her head with a blanket like a child hiding from a nightmare, not realizing the nightmare had been in the room with her. She thought about the seconds before she pulled the blanket over her head, the moment she scrambled back and fumbled for her phone. If she had turned around then, if she had looked behind the couch instead of at the glass, what would she have seen? Would he have stepped forward? Would he have covered her mouth? Would she have been able to scream at all? The operator's voice was still in her phone, faint and forgotten. Alara realized the call was still connected. She had never hung up. The operator was saying her name, asking if she was okay. Alara lifted the phone with shaking hands and tried to speak, but only a small broken sound came out. Miller took the phone gently and spoke into it, confirming officers were on scene and the caller was safe. Safe. The word felt strange, because safe wasn't what she felt. Safe would have meant nothing had entered her home. Whose safe would have meant the storm kept everyone away. Safe would have meant she had been alone in a locked house watching a movie. Instead, the storm had covered everything. The snow had hidden tracks outside and the wind had swallowed quiet sounds. If the garage door had been left cracked, if the latch had failed, if someone had pushed it open, the blizzard would have helped him. It would have wrapped him in noise and white and made him invisible. Backup arrived 10 minutes later, then another car behind it. The house filled with more lights, more voices, more boots on the floor. Officers checked every room, every closet, every corner. They opened doors Alara hadn't thought about in years. They looked behind shower curtains. They checked under beds. They found no one. The man who had stood behind her was gone. Hernandez came back inside after another yard sweep, snow clinging to her shoulders. She shook her head once, frustration tight in her mouth. "No trail," she said. "The wind's wiping everything. If he went back the way he came, it'll be filled in already." Miller looked at Alara and his face softened again, but the grimness stayed. He knew what he was doing. he said quietly. "Storms like this, they're cover." Alara stared at the sliding glass door. The TV had gone to a menu screen, glowing blue and silent. Her popcorn lay on the floor like spilled teeth. She couldn't stop thinking about the smile. Not because it was scary in a movie way, but because now she understood it wasn't meant for her as a warning. It wasn't even meant to scare her into hiding. It was meant to enjoy the moment, to enjoy being close enough to hurt her, while she sat facing away, believing the danger was outside. One of the officers offered to drive her to a neighbor's house or call a friend. Alara shook her head because she couldn't form words. She didn't want to step outside. She didn't want to walk past the garage hallway. She didn't want to move through any part of the house without a light on. Eventually, the officers did what they could do. They checked locks. They showed her how to set a security bar on the sliding door. They advised her to keep the lights on, keep her phone charged, call again if she heard anything at all. They told her her parents should come home if possible, or she should stay somewhere else. When the last patrol car pulled away and the flashing lights disappeared into the storm, the house seemed to shrink back into itself. The furnace hummed. The wind still screamed outside. But the feeling of safety was gone, like something had been taken from the room and would not be replaced easily. Alara sat on the couch for a long time without moving. She didn't put the movie back on. She didn't clean up the popcorn. She didn't pick up the blanket. She just stared at the dark glass doors until her eyes ached. At one point she saw her own reflection faintly in the pane, her face pale, eyes too wide. Behind her reflection was the darker shape of the couch, and she had to fight the urge to turn around again and again, even though she knew there was nothing there now. Because that was the worst part. Not the storm, not the footprints, not the police. It was the new understanding that a person could be in your home, she close enough to touch you, and you could still think you were alone. It was the realization that glass can lie, especially at night, especially when you want so badly to believe the danger is on the other side of it. Later, when her parents called to check on her because they'd heard about the storm getting worse, she tried to explain what happened. She managed pieces, a man, the patio, the police, footprints in the living room. The words felt unreal out loud, like she was describing someone else's story. When she finally went to bed, she didn't turn the lights off. She didn't close her eyes easily. She locked her bedroom door and pushed a chair against it, even though she knew a chair wouldn't stop someone determined. She lay there listening to the storm and the old house noises, and every time the wind hit the siding, she saw that smile again, not outside the glass, in the glass, a reflection, a reminder that for a long time that night, the man hadn't been trying to get in. He had already been there behind her, breathing in the warmth of her living room, waiting for her to turn her head. When I look back at my teenage years, from about 1990 through 1997, the memories come in two layers. The first layer is the one you expect. Ordinary suburbia, routine drama, the noisy confidence of being young. Naperville, Illinois. A quiet subdivision built in the 1970s where the houses looked like they'd been stamped out of the same mold. Brick fronts, big square windows, tidy lawns, driveways just wide enough for two cars. The kind of neighborhood where kids rode bikes in lazy circles until the streetlights blinked on, where nobody locked their doors until late, where every garage smelled like grass clippings and motor oil, and somebody's dad's half-finished project. The second layer is harder to describe. It's a handful of moments that don't sit comfortably in the first layer, moments that don't have neat explanations. Small things, sounds mostly. The kind of thing you can laugh at in the moment and then feel unsettled by later, when you're alone and the house is quiet. If you ask me now, I'll still tell the story with jokes, because it's easier that way. I call it the ghost parrot. Not a ghost that floats down hallways or whispers your name in the dark. Not one that throws objects or slams doors for attention. Just something that listened and repeated, like a bird mimicking a human voice, except what it mimicked wasn't words. It mimicked moments. It's strange what stays with you. I can barely remember the names of half my teachers. I can't remember what I wore to prom, but I can still hear, perfectly, the sound of a handful of colored pencils hitting tile. Not a similar sound, not something like that. The exact sound, as if someone pressed play on an invisible cassette tape. The first time it happened, it was nothing. Now, it was so normal I wouldn't even call it the first time if the second time hadn't made it into something else. It was late afternoon, probably fall, because the light coming through the kitchen windows had that thin, slanted look it gets when summer is over and the sun stops trying so hard. I was working on a school project at the kitchen table, the kind that required colored pencils and poster board, and the full patience of someone who would rather be outside. Our kitchen had that familiar suburban layout, tile floor, oak cabinets, a small bar that separated it from the family room, and a phone mounted on the wall with a long curly cord that always got tangled. I reached for my colored pencils and somehow knocked them off the table. Maybe my elbow hit the box, maybe I was turning too fast. 20 pencils went everywhere at once, clattering against the tile in a sharp, chaotic burst. A sound like a brief storm, I swore. Because I was a teenager and swearing felt like punctuation, then I bent down and picked them up. I didn't think about it again. The next day, my brother and I were upstairs. He was older than me by a couple years, and at that age, a couple years made him feel like a different species. He had his own music, his own friends, his own attitude, the kind that said he was barely tolerating being part of the same house. We were both in the hallway between our rooms, heading in opposite directions. Not really talking, just moving around each other like we always did. Then we heard it, the exact same sound. A burst of pencils hitting tile, the same uneven rhythm, the same quick scrape, the same little rolling taps at the end as a few pencils bounced and spun. It came from the bathroom between our rooms. We both froze at the same time. We looked at each other with that same wide-eyed expression you see in people who are trying to confirm they aren't imagining things. Then, because we were teenage boys and because fear was something you covered with noise, we laughed. Too loud, too fast. Like laughter was a shield you could raise in front of you. "What was that?" he said, but he was already smiling in a way that didn't reach his eyes. "I don't know," I said, and I heard my own voice wobble slightly, so I forced a laugh. "Nice one." We walked into the bathroom together, expecting to find something. A pencil, a cup knocked over. Is some evidence that would let us name it and file it away. The bathroom was clean, empty floor, no pencils, no box, nothing. My brother opened the cabinet under the sink, as if the pencils might be hiding there, which made us laugh again because it was ridiculous. But the laughter didn't feel real. It felt like we were making noise so we wouldn't have to listen to the silence underneath it. "Ha," he said, "ghost pencils." We made jokes. We named it. We called it the parrot. An invisible roommate with a sense of humor. That's how it started, as a joke. Once you name something, it stops being unknown, at least on the surface. You can act like you're in control because you have a word for it. We treated it like a quirk of the house, like a weird echo, like something we'd forget about when we moved out. But the house didn't stop. Nights were when things got strange most often, not because the darkness itself did anything, but because at night you notice sounds differently. In the daytime, there's background noise, cars passing, people talking, TV on. In the evening, the house has more room to speak. We had a tomcat back then, a big orange and white bully of a cat who treated our stairs like his personal track. Every night, without fail, he would tear up and down the staircase, claws digging into carpet, body thumping against each step. A hard turn on the landing, then down again. It was so loud it felt like a person running. My dad hated it. He had that exhausted working dad anger that comes from being woken up by something you can't reason with. "Somebody stop that damn cat," he'd yell from his bedroom. "I don't have money to replace the carpet every year." Usually, one of us would grab the cat, toss him into a room, shut the door, and deal with his angry meows for a few minutes until he settled down. It became part of our nighttime routine. Annoying, but normal. Then came the night the routine broke. It was late. I was in my room reading, probably trying to pretend I cared about school. The familiar sound started, claws scraping, running, thumping on the stairs. Dad's voice followed louder now because he'd been dealing with it for years. "Stop that damn cat!" My brother stepped out of his room. I heard his door open. I heard his footsteps in the hall. A few seconds later, he opened my door without knocking. That wasn't normal for him. He didn't just wander into my space unless he wanted something. "You heard him, right?" he asked. "The cat?" I said. "Yeah, he's been at it for like 10 minutes. He didn't respond right away. He looked pale, like the color had been pulled out of his face. "Us too," he said finally. His voice was quieter than usual. "It's just that—" "What?" I asked. He motioned for me to follow him. I put down the book and walked into the hallway. The thumping on the stairs had stopped, but the air still felt tight, like the house was holding on to the noise even after it ended. We went into my brother's room. He didn't say anything. He walked to his closet and put his hand on the door. Then he opened it. Inside, in the clothes hamper, our tomcat was curled up and asleep. Not dozing, not half awake, fully asleep, the deep kind where their paws twitch and their breathing is slow and steady. The cat didn't even lift his head when the closet door creaked open. My brother stared at him like he didn't trust his own eyes. "I didn't know he was in here," he whispered. "I just opened it now." We both turned and looked toward the hallway, toward the stairs, as if we expected to see something standing there. The house was silent. Not normal quiet, not the kind of quiet that comes after a cat stops running. This was a blank quiet, like the house had wiped itself clean. I felt my stomach drop, not in a dramatic way, in a slow, cold way. For the first time, I didn't bother pretending to be tough. I didn't crack a joke, I didn't laugh. I just picked up my pillow and went to my brother's room and slept on the floor like a little kid. After that, the parrot wasn't funny anymore. We still joked about it sometimes because the habit was hard to break, but the jokes changed. They got flatter. The laughter didn't last. We started using humor the way you use a flashlight in a dark room, just enough to see where your feet are, not enough to look too closely at the corners. The sounds kept happening. Not every night, not like a schedule, but often enough that it became part of the house's personality, a background hum of wrongness. Sometimes it was footsteps in the hallway when everyone was sitting in the family room. Not creaks, not settling, clear steps, the weight shifting from heel to toe. Then nothing. Sometimes it was a faint laugh from downstairs when everyone was upstairs. The sound so quick you couldn't tell if it was real until you realized you'd all stopped talking at the same time to listen. Sometimes it was the sound of the basement door handle turning, even though the basement door was open and didn't need turning. And sometimes it was the parrot repeating something we had done earlier that day, as if the house was replaying moments back to us. A dropped object, a cabinet shutting, a chair scraping, same rhythm, same tone. Same little imperfections that make a sound unique. Over time, we got numb. That's what people do. You can't stay scared every day. Your body gets tired of it. Your mind adapts by turning fear into annoyance, turning shock into routine. Then life changed in ways that had nothing to do with ghosts. By 1996, my brother had moved to St. Louis. My parents split. My dad moved out. The family that had filled the house with noise and movement and arguments was suddenly gone. The house, once crowded, felt too big, too empty. It was just me and my mom left in it, and we were trying to keep it clean and presentable for realtors and potential buyers. She wanted the place to look perfect. Polished floors, neat corners, staged furniture, the illusion of a happy home. I was 17 and barely home. Between school, work, friends, and all the ways teenagers avoid being present for adult heartbreak, I spent as much time away as possible. One afternoon, my mom said something that made me stop. "It's not happy about all the changes," she said, like she was talking about the dog or the weather. "What's not happy?" I asked, already annoyed, because teenagers treat every conversation like it's a trap. She looked at me like I already knew. "The house," she said, "and the dog isn't happy either." She meant her Jack Russell Terrier, a jittery little thing that adored her and distrusted everyone else. The dog had always been skittish, but lately it seemed worse. It paced. It shook at random. It stared at corners and growled softly at nothing. At 17, I didn't want to hear my mom talk about the house having feelings. I shrugged, made some half joke, and went back to my room. But her words stuck with me more than I wanted. Not happy, acting out. As if the house was something alive enough to react. Things escalated the weekend my dad came over to help clean the basement. A pipe had sprung a leak and soaked several boxes. Old documents, photos, decorations, random family stuff. The basement was one of those typical Midwest basements. Unfinished in parts, concrete floor, low ceiling, that smell of cement and cardboard and damp air. We spent the entire weekend moving boxes from one side of the basement to the other, trying to get them away from where the water had pooled. It was ugly work. We sorted through old life. We lifted heavy boxes full of things nobody had touched in years. We argued. We sweated. We felt the strain of being a family, trying to pretend it still operated the way it used to. By the end of Sunday, the boxes were stacked along the opposite wall. Not pretty, but moved. Safe. On Monday, it rained again. When I got home around the same time as my mom, something was wrong, immediately. I could feel it in the air, the way you can feel when a room has been disturbed. The dog was shaking violently in my mom's arms, panting hard, trying to crawl into her chest. It kept darting its gaze toward the basement door and then back to her, like it wanted to drag her away but didn't know how. My mom told me she'd finally put the dog in the car and driven to McDonald's just to get out of the house for a while. Not because she wanted fries, but because she couldn't stand being inside those walls with the dog losing its mind. Again, I shrugged. I told myself she was stressed. Divorce does that. Selling a house does that. Dogs pick up on stress. That was the normal explanation, and I grabbed it because the alternative made my skin crawl. On Tuesday, my dad came back to grab a few remaining boxes. We heard him before we saw him. "God damn it," he yelled from the basement, and the sound exploded up the stairs like a thrown object. Then he started cursing, words sharper than usual, the kind of cursing that means he's not just annoyed. He's angry in a way that feels personal. My mom's face went pale. She looked at me, and for once there was no argument in her eyes, no bitterness, just the same confusion I felt. I followed the sound down toward the basement steps. Dad came up partway, face red, eyes wild with anger. "Why did you move everything back?" he shouted at my mom. "Why? The boxes are soaked again." My mom stared at him. "I didn't move anything," she said, and she sounded genuinely baffled. I went down the stairs and looked. Now every single box we had moved over the weekend was back on the opposite side again, not stacked neatly the way we'd left them, but standing on their sides, lids facing outward, leaning awkwardly against the wall like someone had dragged them one by one and didn't care how they ended up. The floor beneath them was soaked. Damp cardboard smell hit my nose. The air felt heavier down there, thick with moisture and something else I didn't want to name. Dad swore under his breath. He muttered about my mom doing it out of spite. Even now, years later, he still chooses to believe that because it's easier. Easier than admitting the alternative. Easier than admitting that a house might have rearranged your life while you slept. But neither my brother nor I ever believed she did it. My mom couldn't have moved that many heavy boxes alone in one day. She wasn't strong enough. She wasn't cruel enough. And even if she had been both, why would she? To ruin her own house sale. To make her own life harder? The house had done it. I didn't say that out loud, not then. I didn't have language for it, but the thought sat in my head like a stone. After that, the house behaved differently. The mimicry was still there, but the tone changed. It felt less like a trick and more like attention, less like random echoes and more like something reacting to being watched, to being altered, to being prepared for strangers. We were showing the house, which meant the basement door had to stay closed during showings. Normally it stayed open because the cat's litter box was down there. For 6 years, that door had never been kept shut for long. It was always open a crack at least, like the house needed the basement connected to everything else. One evening, I was alone in the family room watching TV. My mom was outside in the backyard, brushing the dog. The sliding glass door was open enough that we could see each other. I and the dog kept glancing back into the house like it didn't trust the air inside. I wasn't paying full attention to the show when I heard knocking. Not a casual knock, not a neighbor tap. Sharp, insistent, impatient. I sat up. My first thought was the front door, but our front door was metal, and this sounded like knuckles on wood. The back door was glass. The sound was definitely from somewhere inside the house. I stood, listening. The knocking came again. 3 fast hits, then a pause. Like whoever was knocking expected an answer. I glanced through the glass at my mom. She raised her eyebrows and mouthed, "Well, answer it." "I'm trying," I mouthed back, but my voice didn't come. Because something clicked in my head. There was only one wooden door left in the house that could make that sound. The basement door. As soon as the realization landed, the knocking stopped. Not faded, not slowed, stopped. Like the hand had been lifted away the moment I identified it. Yeah, I walked into the kitchen slowly, my heart thudding harder than it should have. The house felt too quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you aware of your own breathing. I stood in front of the basement door with my hand hovering over the knob. I didn't want to open it. Opening it felt like agreeing to something, like acknowledging a game I didn't know the rules of. But I opened it anyway because I was 17 and stubborn and tired of being afraid of my own home. The door swung inward. Nothing was there, just the basement's darkness, still and heavy, that smell of cement, cardboard, and damp air. I stared down the stairs, and in that moment I didn't want to go down. I didn't want to hear anything from below. I didn't want the parrot to repeat something else back at me, something more personal, something that would stick to my memory the way the pencils had. I shut the door again carefully, without slamming it. After that day, we stopped closing the basement door unless a realtor told us we had to. The house seemed calmer when it was open, as if it hated being sealed off from its own depth. Or as if whatever was down there hated the door being shut, like a mouth being held closed. We sold the house not long after. My mom and I moved. My brother stayed in St. Louis. My dad started his own life somewhere else. The suburbia layer of my memories moved on, because that's what life does. Houses change owners. Families scatter. The past becomes a collection of photos and old jokes, and yet, every now and then, especially late at night, I still hear it. Not in my current house, not as an actual sound I can point to and prove, but in my head with perfect clarity, as if someone has stored those noises and can play them whenever they want. Pencils clattering on tile, a cat running on stairs that it isn't running on, 3 impatient knocks on a wooden door that no longer belongs to me. Sometimes, when the world is quiet and I'm lying awake, I wonder what it was we lived with. Not a demon, not a poltergeist, not something cinematic, something smaller and stranger, something that copied, something that listened and learned the language of a household the way a parrot learns a phrase. And I wonder if it stayed behind, because that's the part that still makes my throat tighten, even after all these years. We sold that house like it was just wood and brick and carpet. We passed it on to someone else the way you pass on a used car. We assumed anything strange would end with us leaving because we wanted it to end. But houses don't always feel empty when people move out. Sometimes they feel hungry, sometimes they feel relieved. And sometimes, if you believe my grandmother's stories about how places can hold on to love and grief and memory, sometimes they hold on to something else too. Something that doesn't need bodies because it can live off echoes. I still think about the next family that moved in. The ones who walked through the rooms with realtors and smiled at the big windows and talked about painting the walls. The ones who probably laughed off the first strange noise as a settling house, as old pipes, as neighborhood kids playing tricks. I picture a teenager dropping something in a kitchen and swearing, and then the next day, hearing the exact same sound replayed from a room that's empty. And I imagine that moment when they stop laughing and look at each other, realizing the house is listening back. Because the thing about a ghost parrot is that it doesn't have to show you what it is. It only has to prove once that it remembers. When I was 17, I thought I understood what danger looked like in my hometown. It wasn't a city kind of danger. There were no alleyways, no busy streets full of strangers, no sirens at night. It was the opposite. The town was quiet in a way that could feel peaceful during the day and strangely wrong after dark. Houses sat far apart, each one with a long driveway and trees pressed close around it, like the woods were trying to reclaim everything. There were no streetlights. At night, the roads turned into black ribbons cutting through darker forest. Sound didn't travel the way it should have. Sometimes you could scream as a joke with your friends, and the sound would seem to disappear into the trees, like the woods swallowed it. Most of the time, nothing happened. People left doors unlocked. Kids rode their bikes on the shoulder of the road. Parents didn't panic if you were late by 15 minutes because time moved differently there. It was a place where you could convince yourself you were safe simply because there wasn't much around. Except there was one thing, one story that never fully went away. It happened about 10 years before that night, back when I was still little enough that the memory of it is more like a feeling than a clear picture. A 5th grade girl had been abducted. She vanished in the kind of way that makes a town hold its breath. Searches were organized. People walked the woods in lines. Like flashlights swung through brush. The local diner stayed open late for volunteers, handing out coffee like that could keep everyone from falling apart. Weeks passed, then months. The girl didn't come back. Years later, her remains were found behind a small restaurant, one of those places on the edge of town where people stopped for fries and milkshakes after school. It should have been a simple discovery that brought closure, but it didn't. No one was ever caught. No one could say with certainty who did it or why. In a small place, that kind of story becomes part of the air. It becomes a warning parents repeat without meaning to. Don't walk alone. Don't get in a car with anyone. If you see something strange, come straight home. Even if adults stopped talking about it openly, kids still absorbed it. We traded details we didn't understand. We dared each other to walk near the restaurant at night. We whispered about suspects. We watched strangers too closely. By 17, I told myself it was all history, a tragedy that had happened in the past, something that didn't touch my life directly anymore. It had become one of those dark facts that sat on the shelf in the back of your mind. You didn't forget it, but you stopped expecting it to matter. And then there was that night. It was a party at a friend's house, the kind of party that happened almost every weekend in towns like mine, because there was nothing else to do. No clubs, no late-night restaurants, no movie theater worth driving to. People gathered in basements and living rooms, turned the music up too loud, drank too much, laughed too hard, and pretended the world was bigger than it was. The house was on a long road that ran along the edge of the woods. You could drive for miles and pass maybe 2 other homes. Trees leaned in on both sides, and in the dark, the forest felt like a wall. During the day, it was just scenery. At night, it felt like something watching. Inside the house, it was warm, loud, and familiar. The air smelled like cheap beer and sweat and whatever snacks someone had thrown into a bowl. Music rattled the windows. People were crowded into small spaces, talking in clumps, shouting to be heard over the speakers. Someone had turned on colored lights in the living room, and they blinked in slow patterns, making everyone's face look strange and flushed. I'd been drinking for hours, not enough to be out of control, but enough that I was aware of every choice I was making. I had always been the cautious one in my group, the one who didn't like risking a drive home after a few drinks, even if the roads were empty. I'd lost people in my town to drunk driving. Everyone had. It wasn't something you joked about for long, so I had a sleeping bag in my trunk, rolled tight and shoved under other junk. It became almost a joke with my friends, like I was the parent of the group. "Don't worry," someone would say. "She's got her sleeping bag." As if it was funny that I planned ahead. As if planning ahead meant you thought something bad could happen. Around 2 in the morning, the storm arrived with the kind of suddenness you only really get in rural places. There wasn't much warning. 1 minute the night was quiet outside, and the next, thunder cracked so hard the house seemed to shiver. People cheered like it was part of the fun. The bass from the music kept thumping, and someone turned the volume even higher, like they were competing with the weather. Then the rain hit. Not a soft drizzle, not a gentle shower. It came down in thick sheets, pounding the roof and blasting the windows so hard it sounded like handfuls of gravel being thrown at the house. Lightning flashed behind the curtains, turning the living room bright white for split seconds, then dropping it back into colored shadows. The storm made everyone louder. People yelled. They ran from window to watch. Someone opened the door for a second and got shouted at because rain sprayed into the hallway. It was exciting in that stupid teenage way, like the storm was a show meant just for us. After a while, I decided I should grab my sleeping bag before I got too tired, before I forgot, before it got even later and someone else fell asleep in the room I wanted to claim. I told my friends I'd be right back. Someone shouted something about me being responsible. Someone else laughed. I pulled my jacket tighter around me as if it would help, even though I knew it wouldn't. The second I stepped outside, the rain hit me like a wall. It wasn't just wet, it was cold, and it felt heavy, almost sharp against my skin. Wind pushed it sideways so it slapped my face and soaked my hair immediately. The yard and driveway were black, the world lit only by the house behind me and the occasional lightning that revealed everything for a blink. I hurried across the driveway, my sneakers slipping on wet gravel. I squinted into the darkness, trying to find my car. It was parked just beyond the driveway, half on the grass, half on the shoulder of the road, because there hadn't been enough space for everyone's cars to fit neatly. For a moment, I couldn't see it at all. Then lightning flashed, and there it was, a hard outline of metal and glass, too bright for an instant, then gone again as darkness returned. When I reached the trunk, I hit the button and the lid popped open. Rain hammered against it immediately, drumming above my head. I leaned in and started digging through the mess back there. Old school papers, an ice scraper, a jacket I'd forgotten about, a small toolbox. My fingers were clumsy from cold and wet. I muttered under my breath, irritated with myself for not putting the sleeping bag somewhere easier to reach. Thunder cracked again, so close it made my chest jump. For a second, the sound felt like it came from directly above me. The trees swayed and groaned in the wind. Rain ran down the back of my neck. I shoved aside a pile of things and finally saw the sleeping bag, tucked under a plastic bin. I grabbed for it. Lightning flashed. And in that bright, harsh moment, the world turned clear. A man was standing a few feet away from me, so close that if I'd reached out, I could have touched him. He wasn't approaching. He wasn't moving quickly. He wasn't making noise. He was just there, upright and still facing me. In the lightning's white glare, his shape looked too solid, like he'd been cut out of the dark. I froze so hard I felt locked in place. My hands went numb around the sleeping bag. My heart did something strange, like it stopped for half a beat and then slammed back into motion harder than before. The flash faded and he became a silhouette again, but I didn't need the light to know he was still there. I hadn't heard footsteps. I hadn't heard branches breaking or gravel shifting. I hadn't even had that sense you sometimes get when someone is nearby. 1 second I was alone with my trunk open, and the next there was a man standing close enough to be inside my personal space, as if he had stepped out of the storm itself. The next lightning flash came a few seconds later, and I saw him more clearly. He looked middle-aged, maybe late 40s or early 50s. His hair was plastered to his head by rain. Water ran down his face in streams. His clothes were soaked through, clinging to him, but he didn't look cold. He didn't look annoyed by the storm. He didn't flinch when thunder rolled again. He didn't lift a hand to shield his eyes from rain. He just stared at me with an expression that didn't match anything. It wasn't angry. It wasn't friendly. It wasn't even curious. It was blank in a way that made my stomach twist. I made a small sound, some kind of involuntary gasp, like my body realized the danger before my brain could form a sentence. I wanted to ask who he was. I wanted to shout. I wanted to run. Instead, I stood there, caught between shock and disbelief, because part of my mind kept insisting there had to be a normal explanation. Maybe he lived nearby and was checking on the cars. Maybe he thought I was someone else. Maybe he was drunk and lost. But none of those explanations fit the way he stood, the way he didn't announce himself, the way he positioned himself close to a teenage girl in the dark without making a sound. Then he spoke. His voice was calm, casual, almost conversational, like we were two strangers passing on a sidewalk during the day. I just love thunder and lightning storms, don't you? Those were his exact words. I can hear them, even now, years later, like they were recorded and played back inside my head. It wasn't the sentence that scared me most. It was the way he said it, the emptiness behind it. The fact that he spoke as if this was normal, as if it made perfect sense for him to be standing that close to me at 2 in the morning in the pouring rain. He didn't smile. He didn't laugh. He didn't raise his voice to be heard over the storm. He didn't act like he understood that his presence was terrifying. It felt like he was reading from a script meant for a different situation. My mind finally snapped into action. A bright, sharp fear hit me so suddenly it felt like heat in my chest. I didn't answer him. I didn't ask anything. I didn't try to be polite. I just reacted. I yanked the sleeping bag halfway out of the trunk, then dropped it without thinking. My hands flew to the trunk lid, and I slammed it shut with all my strength. The sound echoed off the trees, loud and heavy, like a gunshot in the rain. For a fraction of a second, I expected him to move, to reach out, to grab me, to say something else. He didn't, and that made it worse. I turned and ran. I sprinted back toward the house so fast my feet slipped on wet gravel. Rain smacked my face, stinging my eyes. I barely felt it. I could hear my own breathing, sharp and panicked, louder than the storm. I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The idea of turning my head and seeing him closer, seeing him moving, felt unbearable. I burst through the front door, dripping wet, gasping for air. The noise inside hit me like a wall. Music, laughter, and someone shouting. For a second it felt wrong that the party was still happening, wrong that everyone was still relaxed and loud when something outside had just changed my whole world. A few people turned to look at me. Some laughed automatically because I was soaked. Then they saw my face. The laughter faded. "What happened?" someone asked. I tried to speak, but my mouth was dry, and my words came out tangled. I told them there was a man outside. I told them he was right by my car. I told them what he said. I remember pointing toward the driveway, my hand shaking. A couple of my friends laughed at first, not in a cruel way, but in that disbelieving way people laugh when they think someone is exaggerating. Someone said it was probably one of the neighbors checking on the party. Someone else joked that maybe I'd had too much to drink. But I kept insisting. I could hear my own voice rising, almost pleading. "Just look," I said. "Just look outside." A few people moved toward the window, more to calm me down than because they believed me. Someone pulled back the curtain. At first, there was nothing. Just rain and darkness, and the blur of water streaming down the glass. The street beyond looked empty in the dim light from the house. Then lightning flashed again. It lit up the road like daylight for a split second. And there he was, the same man, walking slowly down the road, moving away from the house, not running, and not hurrying. His posture was relaxed, as if he was taking a casual stroll on a normal night. Rain pounded on him, and he didn't seem to care. He didn't look back. He didn't wave. He didn't react to the house full of people watching him through the window. The room went quiet in a way that felt sudden and unnatural. Even the music seemed too loud now, like it didn't belong. No one laughed after that. Someone whispered, "What the hell?" A couple of my friends stepped back from the window as if they were afraid he might turn around and see them. Someone else pulled the curtain closed quickly, like that could erase him. We watched in flashes of lightning as he continued down the road until the darkness swallowed him again. Between flashes, he vanished completely, then reappeared farther away, then vanished for good. Someone locked the door. Someone checked the back door. A few people looked out other windows, trying to see if he had turned into the yard or come around to the side. No one wanted to go outside, not after seeing how close he'd been to me without anyone noticing. For the rest of the night, the party never really recovered. The storm kept raging, but it wasn't fun anymore. People stayed inside. They spoke quieter. They clustered in groups. Every time lightning flashed, someone would glance toward the windows. I sat on the couch, wrapped in a towel someone found for me. I'm still shaking from adrenaline. I couldn't stop replaying the moment in my head. The bright flash, his sudden presence, his voice. I kept thinking about how silent he had been, how he appeared without warning, how he chose to speak in that calm, casual way. How he didn't react when I ran, as if my fear didn't matter to him at all. And underneath all of it, like a low hum, was the old story of the girl who had been taken years ago, the unsolved case everyone knew but rarely named. The reminder that sometimes people could do terrible things in quiet places and never be caught. Eventually, people tried to settle down and sleep wherever they could. I didn't. I lay awake with my eyes open, listening to the storm and to every small sound in the house. Someone shifting on a couch, a floorboard creaking, the wind pressing rain against the siding. The storm finally moved on sometime before morning. The rain softened, then stopped. The thunder rolled farther away until the night became quiet again. That was almost worse. The silence felt heavy, like it was waiting. When the skies started to lighten, people began to stir. The house looked normal again in the gray morning light. The yard was soaked. Puddles filled low spots in the driveway. Tree branches sagged with water. Someone suggested looking outside for footprints, like that would prove the man had been real in a way we could understand. We went out carefully, a group of us, still tired, still unsettled. The air smelled clean after the rain, like wet leaves and cold soil. Birds had started calling from somewhere deep in the woods, as if nothing unusual had happened. The road was wet and shiny. The gravel shoulder was dark with rain. We searched the area near my car, near where I'd been standing. There were no clear footprints. The rain had erased everything. Any marks in the grass looked like they could have been made by water or wind. The shoulder of the road was too hard to hold prints. The driveway had been walked on by too many people. It felt like the night had been washed clean. We talked about calling the police, but what would we even say? A man walked down the road during a storm. He said something weird. He didn't touch anyone. He didn't break anything. We didn't know his name. We couldn't describe him beyond middle-aged, soaked, quiet. In a small town, calling the police could also mean calling someone's uncle, someone's neighbor, someone you'd see at the grocery store the next day. In the end, no one called. By late morning, people started going home. They laughed a little too loudly as they said goodbye, like they were trying to push the fear away by acting normal. Cars pulled out of the driveway, tires spraying water. When I got in my own car, I glanced at the trunk. My sleeping bag was still inside, now useless. I hadn't even thought about it after I slammed the lid. The drive home felt strange. The town looked the same, trees, fields, the small cluster of buildings by the main road. Everything was still, normal, as if the storm and the man and the fear had all been a dream, but I knew it wasn't. I never found out who he was. No one ever mentioned him later like it was a known person. No one said, "Oh, that's just so-and-so, he's harmless." No rumors surfaced. No explanation arrived to make it make sense. And that lack of answers is what stayed with me. But sometimes I wonder if he had been watching me for longer than I realized. If he had been standing in the dark near my car before the lightning showed him to me. If he waited for that exact moment when I was alone, distracted, bent over the trunk to step closer without sound. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd answered him, if I'd tried to be polite, if I'd laughed nervously like teenagers do when they're uncomfortable, if I'd kept digging for my sleeping bag as if he belonged there. Sometimes I think about that old case again, the missing girl, the years without answers, the fact that someone in our town had done something unforgivable and never paid for it. And sometimes, late at night, when a storm rolls in where I live now and thunder rattles my windows, the memory comes back so strongly it feels like it's happening again. I can smell wet air. I can feel rain on my face. I can see the white flash of lightning and the sudden shape of a man standing too close. And I hear his voice, calm and casual, like it's right behind me in the dark. I just love thunder and lightning storms, don't you? I was home alone that evening, and the house felt bigger because of it. Not in a dramatic, haunted way, but in the simple way empty rooms amplify your own thoughts. Every little sound had space to travel. The refrigerator's quiet cycle, the faint click of the thermostat, the occasional settling creak that older houses make when the day's heat finally starts to drain out of the walls. Normally, those sounds disappeared under other noises. My boyfriend clanking around in the kitchen, the television on low, his voice calling from one room to another. With him gone for 2 weeks, the place had developed a kind of hush that didn't feel peaceful, so much as unfinished. That night he was finally supposed to come back. Not early, not with any surprise plan. We'd texted back and forth all day. He told me roughly what time he'd get in. I told him I had work in the morning at 6:30 and that I was going to be asleep by the time he arrived, whether he liked it or not. It wasn't about being cold. I missed him. I'd missed him enough that I'd spent the past few nights feeling half annoyed at his empty side of the bed, half embarrassed at how often I'd caught myself listening for his key in the lock even when I knew he wasn't coming. But I was exhausted. I had that kind of tiredness that makes your whole body feel heavy, the kind that sits behind your eyes and turns everything into a chore. Now, waking up even 10 minutes earlier felt like a punishment when you already had a long day waiting for you. I wanted one thing: to sleep and sleep deeply and wake up without the feeling that my brain was already running before my feet touched the floor. I planned the night like a checklist: shower, dry my hair, put on something comfortable, set my alarm, lock the doors, get into bed. I wasn't even thinking about fear. If anything, I was thinking about time. How fast I could do everything and still have a few minutes to breathe before crawling under the covers. It was summer. The air was warm even in the evening, but I still didn't want to go to bed with wet hair. My hair has always been stubborn. If I fall asleep with it damp, it dries into weird bends and kinks that no brush can smooth out. The only way to fix it is a full shower or a flat iron, and extra time I don't have. Now I'd rather do anything than set my alarm earlier just to fight my own head. So when I got out of the shower, I wrapped my towel tight and reached for the hairdryer without even thinking. The bathroom was steamed up, mirrors fogged, the kind of humid warmth that makes you feel sleepy the moment you step out of the water. I plugged the dryer in. The cord made a soft scrape against the counter. I flipped my head upside down and started blowing hot air through my hair. The motor filled the room with noise, a steady roar, and for the first time all evening, I felt like the world was simple. Hair, heat, routine. 30 seconds in, maybe less. I thought I heard something. It was faint, distant, like a muffled thump that didn't belong to the hairdryer's constant sound. I paused and lifted my head. The dryer whined down as I turned it off, and the sudden quiet rushed in, making my ears feel too sharp. For a moment, my first thought wasn't intruder. It was my boyfriend. Maybe he'd gotten home early. It wouldn't have been impossible. Sometimes he surprised me when he missed me too much to stick to the plan. I'd even pictured it earlier. The sound of the front door, his voice calling my name. The way he'd come upstairs like he owned the place, because in a way, he did. I glanced toward the bedroom. My dog was sprawled across the bed, taking up more space than a dog his size had any right to. He was 70 pounds of muscle and fur, and he was snoring like a creature who had never known stress in his entire life. His paws were twitching slightly, chasing something in a dream. If my boyfriend had come home, the dog would have been off the bed in a second, tail wagging so hard it would knock into furniture. He'd rush the stairs, nails tapping, making excited circles like he couldn't decide whether to greet him at the door or wait at the bottom step. My dog was loyal in the simplest way. He loved whoever belonged to the house, and he did not keep that love quiet. But he didn't move. He didn't even lift his head. That told me more than the silence did. I let out a slow breath and told myself it was nothing. Houses make noises, pipes shift, floorboards settle. Maybe the dryer had pulled the plug cord and bumped something. I turned the dryer back on. I flipped my hair forward again and resumed drying, trying to ignore the small part of my mind that had perked up. I could feel that part of me sliding into alertness, like a switch had been flipped. I didn't want it. I wanted the calm fog of getting ready for bed. Not even a full minute passed before I heard something else. This time it wasn't a thump in the distance. This time, even through the hairdryer's roar, it sounded like it came from downstairs. A heavier sound, a shift, something solid making contact with the floor or a wall. I stopped again, a little sharper this time, turned the dryer off, stood perfectly still. The silence that followed didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like the air was holding its breath. I listened. Nothing. I tried to laugh at myself quietly, just a small breathy sound, like that could break whatever tension had formed in my chest. I whistled softly toward the bedroom to see if my dog would react. He cracked one eye open, gave me a look that clearly meant, why are you making noise? And went right back to sleep. Okay, I told myself, if the dog doesn't care, it isn't real. That's how I'd always measured things. If I heard something at night and my dog didn't react, it was just a house sound. If he did react, it was usually a raccoon outside or a stray cat slipping across the yard. He was my built-in reality check. So I turned the hairdryer back on again, trying to finish quickly. My shoulders were tense, though. I could feel it. I could feel my body pulling tight even as my mind tried to stay casual. 30 seconds later, something happened that I couldn't explain away. The upstairs floor shook, just slightly. Not an earthquake, not a dramatic jolt, but enough that I felt it through my bare feet. It was the unmistakable vibration of something downstairs being slammed. Maybe a door, maybe a cabinet, maybe something heavy being dropped. My heart jumped so hard it felt like it punched the inside of my throat. The hairdryer suddenly seemed too loud. I set it down carefully on the counter, not because I was being neat, but because my hands were suddenly unsteady. Someone was in the house. The thought landed fully formed, cold and clear. It didn't come with panic at first. It came with that sharp, focused feeling you get when your body decides something before your mind can argue. It wasn't my boyfriend. If it were him, he would have called out. He always did. He never tried to sneak in quietly. Even when he came home late, he'd announce himself in some way, calling my name, tossing his keys onto the counter, talking to the dog. He'd come upstairs to say hello or scare me in some playful way, and my dog would be losing his mind with happiness. This felt wrong. I walked slowly toward the stairs, the way you do when you don't want your feet to make noise, even though I knew the floor would creak no matter what I did. I forced myself to breathe evenly, a like that could keep me from sounding scared if someone was there. At the top of the staircase, I paused. The stairs went down into darkness. The hallway light was off. The only glow came from the bedroom lamp behind me and the bathroom light. I called out, keeping my voice casual, the way you might greet someone you expected to be there. Hello? No answer, not even a shift. I waited, listened for footsteps, for the sound of a door closing, for anything that would confirm another person in the house. Nothing. I turned my head and looked at my dog. He was awake now, not just awake in a lazy way, but sitting up stiffly on the bed, body angled toward the stairs. His ears were forward. His eyes were wide and focused. He let out a low, confused sound, a small murph that was half question, half warning. He didn't bark. That was the first thing that truly made my stomach twist. My dog barked at delivery drivers. He barked at squirrels. He barked when he thought the wind was suspicious. But this sound wasn't a bark. It was something lower, deeper, as if he wasn't sure barking was the right move, as if barking might make something worse. He looked at me like he expected me to do something about it. It wasn't a heroic look. It wasn't even brave. It was pure honesty. I hear it too, but I am not going down there first. You are the human. You decide. I didn't have my phone. It was downstairs, on the kitchen counter where I'd left it earlier while I put on music. I felt suddenly stupid for that. Stupid in the way you feel when you realize how quickly safety can turn into inconvenience. I moved down the stairs carefully, half steps, hand gripping the railing so tightly my fingers hurt. The darkness seemed thicker as I descended, and the air felt cooler downstairs. The kitchen came into view. The counter, my phone, face up beside a stack of mail. Nothing else moved. No person, no shadow, no open doors. The front door looked closed, locked. The living room was empty. Everything looked exactly as it should. I reached out, grabbed my phone, and turned around immediately, rushing back up the stairs faster than I'd come down. My heart was pounding now, not because I'd seen someone, but because I hadn't. The absence felt like its own kind of threat. It was like my mind wanted something solid to react to, and without it, fear had room to invent anything. But back in the bedroom, I sat on the bed, clutching the phone with both hands like it was a lifeline. My dog stood now, not on the bed, but on the floor, body angled toward the doorway. His lips were pulled back slightly, not a full snarl, but enough to show his teeth. A low growl rolled in his chest, quiet but steady. He still wasn't barking. I stared at him. That growl made my skin go cold. Dogs don't lie. Dogs don't get bored and decide to pretend. If he was growling at the stairs, then something had changed, even if I couldn't see it. I considered calling my boyfriend, considered calling my mom, considered calling the police. But there was always that voice in the back of my head saying, "What are you going to say?" I heard a thump. My floor shook. My dog is acting weird. It sounded weak, like the beginning of a story people would laugh about later. I sat there listening. Nothing. No creaks, no footsteps, no voices. After several minutes of complete silence, a wave of embarrassment crept in. I could feel myself starting to relax, like my own fear was tiring itself out. Maybe it really was the house settling. Maybe something fell in a cabinet because of the dryer's vibration. Maybe my dog was reacting to a noise outside that I couldn't hear. I told myself I needed to stop. I needed to be done. I had work in the morning. I couldn't afford to spiral into paranoia. I stood up, trying to act normal. I walked back into the bathroom and picked up the hairdryer again. The cord felt too stiff in my hand, like it didn't belong. I told myself this would be the last attempt. Finish the hair, go to bed, stop making stories. But that tightness in the air didn't go away. The house felt too still, like the quiet had weight. I glanced back at my dog. His growl had deepened. His posture was tense, muscles tight under his fur. He was looking toward the stairs with that same focused stare. Like his entire world had narrowed to that one dark direction. I swallowed hard. Still, I flipped my head upside down again. Maybe it was denial. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was that stupid human urge to pretend you're not afraid just because you don't want fear to control you. I closed my eyes and turned the dryer on. The roar filled my ears, and for a few seconds, I tried to let it. I tried to let the sound drown out everything, including the way my heart was pounding. Then I opened my eyes. A pair of feet was standing right in front of me, not at the doorway, not down the hall, right there between me and the bathroom counter, close enough that if I straightened up too fast, I would hit my forehead against someone's thigh. Every thought in my head vanished. It didn't scatter. It didn't race. It simply stopped, like a radio cut off mid-song. I launched myself backward without choosing to. Now my shoulders slammed into the bathroom wall hard enough that the mirror rattled. The hairdryer slipped from my hand and clattered against the counter, still roaring for half a second before the cord yanked and it shut off. The sudden quiet that followed was violent. It felt like a vacuum. A cold wave of fear slammed into my chest so hard I felt instantly sick. I couldn't breathe. My mouth opened, but no air seemed to go in. My whole body shook, and it wasn't a delicate trembling. It was full, an uncontrollable shaking, the kind that makes your teeth chatter and your hands go numb. My eyes were fixed on the feet because my brain would not let them move any higher. I couldn't look up. I couldn't make myself see who was attached to them. It felt like looking up would make it real in a different way, a way I couldn't handle. Something primal ripped out of me, a sound I didn't recognize as my own. It came from a place inside me that I'd never needed before. All I managed to say was one word. Jesus! It didn't come out like a normal swear. It came out like a plea. My dog didn't bark. He didn't charge. He didn't leap between us like in movies. For a split second, that thought flickered through my panic like a betrayal. Where is he? Why isn't he doing something? Why am I alone in this? Then I heard a gasp. A very human, very familiar gasp. And then another sound. Someone sucking in a breath like they'd been scared just as badly as I had. When I finally forced myself to lift my gaze, I saw my mother. She was standing there with one hand pressed to her chest, eyes wide, face pale. She looked like she'd been shocked so hard her body hadn't caught up yet. Her mouth was slightly open as if she couldn't decide whether to apologize or yell or laugh. For a second, the world didn't make sense. It took my brain an extra beat to accept that it was her. That the person standing in my bathroom wasn't some stranger, wasn't an intruder, wasn't a nightmare stepping into my life. It was my mom. "Oh my God," she said, her voice shaking. "Oh my God," I echoed because I didn't have any other words. We stared at each other, both breathing hard, both trying to come down from that rush of adrenaline that doesn't disappear just because the threat turns out to be familiar. Then my mom let out a short laugh. Not because it was funny yet, but because laughter was the only release her body could find. I made a strangled sound that turned into laughter too. I felt it burst out of me, shaky and half hysterical, because the fear had nowhere else to go. My knees went weak. I slid down to sit on the closed toilet lid, still wrapped in my towel, hair damp and tangled, laughing like I'd lost my mind. My mom leaned against the doorframe, still clutching her chest, laughing and shaking her head. Tears started to collect in her eyes from the intensity of it. Between laughs, she managed to explain. She'd come over without telling me because she knew I'd been alone with my boyfriend gone. She had a spare key. She'd decided to surprise me by doing a little cleaning downstairs, because that was her love language, whether anyone asked for it or not. She hadn't called out because she saw the bathroom light on and assumed I was showering. She didn't want to disturb me. She thought she'd come upstairs quietly and say hello once I was done. She didn't think about what it might look like from my side. The thumps, the vibration, the quiet movement, the way she'd climbed the stairs without calling my name, the way she'd walked into the bathroom without warning while I was bent over with a roaring hairdryer, unable to hear her approach. My dog, of course, had heard her. That was why he hadn't barked. He knew her scent. He knew her footsteps. But he was confused by her sneaking. Confused enough to warn, but not enough to attack. He'd basically been standing there thinking, why is she acting like this? Once the shock wore off, that detail made the whole thing even funnier, and our laughter got worse. We ended up sitting on the bed together, still wiping tears from our faces, trying to calm down. My dog jumped up between us with the calm satisfaction of someone who had survived an unnecessary crisis. He leaned into my mom like nothing had happened. He didn't apologize. He didn't look guilty. He looked proud, like he'd done exactly what he was supposed to do. Time passed in a blur after that. We tried to settle down, but every time one of us looked at the other, we'd start laughing again. The fear had left behind that weird leftover energy that makes you feel like you can't stop shaking even when you're safe. An hour later, my boyfriend finally came home. He walked in expecting to find me asleep. Instead, he found me and my mom sitting on the bed, hair half dried, still laughing like maniacs. We tried to explain what happened, stumbling over the story because we kept laughing in the middle of it. Every time I got to the part where I opened my eyes and saw feet, my voice would rise, and then I'd crack up again. My boyfriend stood there in the doorway with that look people get when they walk into a situation they can't understand. He listened, confused, then amused, then slightly horrified as he realized how close we'd come to someone actually getting hurt. He kept glancing at my mom like he couldn't believe she'd chosen sneaking as the method of surprise. And my dog acted like the entire thing had nothing to do with him. He flopped down on the rug with a big sigh, as if human drama was exhausting. If dogs could roll their eyes, he would have. Every now and then, he'd look up at us as we talked and laughed, then put his head back down like he was refusing to be involved. Even after everything, and after the laughter and the relief and the ridiculousness of it, I lay awake for a while that night, once everyone had left and the house was quiet again. Not because I was scared anymore, but because my body still remembered the moment before I knew it was my mom. The moment my brain had decided something terrible was about to happen. That instant when my world narrowed down to the sight of feet and the certainty that I was alone. It's strange how quickly fear can take over. How fast a normal night can turn into something that feels like it will change your life. Even when it turns out to be harmless, your body doesn't forget the feeling. It remembers the cold rush, the helplessness, the way your mind goes blank. And for a long time after that, every time I used a hairdryer, I kept my eyes open. I still don't know what happened that night. I've gone over it so many times that the memory feels worn at the edges, like a photograph handled too often. I've tried to convince myself that it was a dream. I've tried to blame it on being half asleep, on a child's imagination, on the strange way the brain works in the dark. But every time I replay it, the details remain sharp. The cold air in the room, the stillness of the hallway, the weight of the blanket on my legs, the exact way the shadows fell across the wall. I was awake, I know I was. I was 9, maybe 10, old enough to understand what my room looked like at night, old enough to know the difference between a dream and the feeling of sitting upright in my own bed with my heart racing. We lived in a neighborhood that wasn't known for being dangerous, but it wasn't completely safe either. There had been break-ins before. My parents were careful in a way that sometimes felt excessive. My bed was pushed into the far corner of my room, a twin bed that always felt smaller than it should have. If I stretched out fully, my feet almost touched the wooden frame at the end. Across from the bed was the window that faced our backyard. That window was layered with protection, blinds on the inside, thick wooden framing, a mesh screen, and outside, bolted into the brick, metal burglar bars. My dad had installed them himself. I remember watching him drill into the wall, sweating, determined to make sure nothing could get in. Even as a kid, I knew that window was secure. If someone tried to get through it, they would have to shatter glass, bend metal, make noise loud enough to wake the whole house. On that night, there was no noise. I woke up suddenly. No bad dream. No loud crash. No sound from the hallway. It was like someone flipped a switch inside my head. 1 second I was asleep. The next I was staring up at the ceiling in the dark. The room felt different. Not louder, not colder, just shifted, like the air had rearranged itself. I lay there for a few seconds, trying to understand why I was awake. The house was silent. I could usually hear the hum of the refrigerator from down the hall, or the distant sound of the television if my dad had fallen asleep watching it. That night, everything felt still. Then I turned my head toward the window. At first, I thought I was just seeing movement because my eyes were adjusting. The blinds were down, and faint streetlight from somewhere beyond the yard made thin lines across the wall. I saw a shadow move behind the blinds. I squinted, telling myself it was a branch swaying. Maybe wind was pushing something against the bars. But the movement didn't look like a branch. It looked deliberate, slow. And then, without the blinds lifting or the glass breaking, a face appeared, not pressed against the glass, not behind it, through it. It was my father's face. He wasn't distorted or blurred. He looked solid, clear, exactly like he did during the day. The same beard he trimmed every Sunday, the same lines around his eyes, the same slight crease in his forehead when he focused on something. But he was outside the window. Outside. My father should have been asleep in the bedroom down the hall. I could picture him clearly in my mind, curled on his side, the blanket pulled up to his chest. And yet, here was his face at my window, as if the layers of glass, screen, and bars meant nothing. He wasn't wearing pajamas. He had on a black beanie pulled low over his head. My dad never slept in a beanie. He rarely wore one at all, and his expression wasn't sleepy. He wasn't groggy or confused. He was looking around my room, not in panic, not urgently, carefully, like he was searching for something specific. My heart started pounding so loudly I could feel it in my throat. I couldn't move. My hands were clenched in the blanket without me realizing it. Every part of my body felt locked in place except my eyes. He turned his head slowly, scanning the corners of the room. His gaze passed over my dresser, my closet door, the posters on the wall. And then he saw me. The second his eyes met mine, something dropped inside me. A cold, heavy feeling that settled deep in my stomach. His expression changed, but not in a dramatic way. It didn't twist into something monstrous. It didn't become violent. It softened. Just slightly. It was the look someone gives when they've found what they were looking for. Recognition. That was what terrified me most. Not anger, not hatred. Recognition. It was like he expected me to be there. Then he moved. He didn't reach for the window. He didn't unlatch anything. He didn't test the bars. He stepped forward, and his body passed through the glass as if it were mist. There was no crack, no shatter, no resistance. He simply walked through it, solid and upright, as though the window wasn't real. When he stood inside my room, fully on the floor, I saw more of him. He was wearing a maroon long-sleeve sweater and black pants. The clothes didn't match my father's usual style. They looked older, like something out of a different decade. The combination of my dad's face and those unfamiliar clothes made my brain struggle to keep up. He wasn't my father. He only looked like him. He gave me a small smile. It wasn't wide. It wasn't exaggerated. It was calm, controlled, and it carried a quiet message I felt in my bones. I found you. He took one slow step toward my bed. The floor didn't creak. The air didn't shift. There was no sound except my own breathing, which had turned shallow and fast. He didn't rush. He didn't loom. He walked the way someone walks into a room they belong in, like he had every right to be there. Something inside me finally snapped loose. Terror broke through the paralysis, sharp and overwhelming. I screamed. Not just a shout. A full panicked shriek that tore out of me before I could think. "Dad!" The word echoed in the room, and the moment it left my mouth, he changed. His body didn't fall or fade slowly. It broke apart, like ash blown by wind. His solid shape dissolved into grayish mist, swirling in front of me. The mist rushed toward my bed, toward me, and dove straight into my blanket. The blanket puffed up as if something heavy had landed under it. It lifted several inches into the air before settling back down. And then it began to glow. The glow wasn't like a lamp. It didn't cast light onto the walls. It didn't brighten the room. It only illuminated the fabric itself. The blanket shone from within, bright and pure, almost white. It was beautiful in a way that made my fear deepen instead of ease. The glow pulsed once, softly, and in that moment, something happened inside me. It's the hardest part to explain. I felt warmth spread through my chest, but it wasn't comforting. It was heavy, like something had settled inside me, something that didn't belong there. It wasn't pain, it wasn't pleasure, it was presence. Before I could make sense of it, I heard footsteps, real ones, heavy and fast. They pounded down the hallway, shaking the floor. A door flung open. My real father rushed into the room, wearing nothing but socks and underwear, exactly how he always looked when something startled him awake. His hair was messy, his eyes wide and alert. "What's wrong?" he demanded, scanning the room. The glow was gone. The blanket lay flat against me. The window was intact, bars in place, blinds unmoved. There was no man, no mist, no sign anything had happened. I sat upright, shaking so hard my teeth clicked together. My throat burned from screaming. I tried to speak, but nothing came out. How could I explain that he had just walked through the window? That something wearing his face had stood at my bedside? He stepped closer, checking the corners of the room, looking under the bed, glancing at the window. He saw nothing out of place. "You had a nightmare," he said gently, his voice softening. "It's okay." It wasn't okay, but I couldn't argue. I couldn't find words that wouldn't sound ridiculous. I just stared at him, searching his face for any hint that he knew more than he was saying. He rubbed my head the way he always did when I was upset. He told me to breathe, to relax. He pushed me gently back into the mattress and pulled the blanket up to my chin. The same blanket, the one that had just glowed. He kissed my forehead and left the room. I listened to his footsteps fade down the hallway. I heard his bedroom door close. I waited until I was sure he was back in bed. The house went silent again. For a few seconds, I almost convinced myself it was over. Then the blanket lifted, slowly, not dramatically, just enough to show that something underneath it was moving. The gray mist seeped out, rising into the center of the room. It gathered itself, condensing, thickening, forming shape and weight. And there he was, again. The same figure, the same face, the same clothes, standing in the exact spot he had stood before. But this time his expression was different. The calm smile was gone. In its place was a small smirk, subtle, knowing. It wasn't cruel, but it carried meaning. It felt like a silent message. I did what I came to do. He looked at me for a long moment, as if waiting for something, as if checking whether I understood. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream again. I just stared, my heart pounding in my ears. After a few seconds, he turned away from me. He walked toward the window, and without touching it, without opening anything, he stepped through it the same way he had before. His body passed through glass, screen, bars, brick. He vanished into the dark. The room was still. I stayed upright in my bed for what felt like hours, staring at the window, expecting it to happen again, expecting the mist to return, expecting the glass to ripple. Nothing else happened. Eventually, exhaustion pressed down on me, but I didn't dare close my eyes fully. I kept watching the window until the sky outside began to lighten. As an adult, I've tried to explain it in every logical way I can. Sleep paralysis, a vivid hallucination, a child's mind blending dream and reality, but I wasn't paralyzed. I screamed. I watched my father run in. I watched him leave. I saw the mist return after he was gone. The memory hasn't faded like dreams do. It hasn't softened or blurred. It sits in my mind with the same clarity as the layout of that room or the feel of the carpet under my feet. Whatever that thing was, it wore my father's face, but it wasn't him. It came for me, specifically. It looked satisfied when it found me, and after that night, something changed. I can't prove it. I can't show anyone evidence, but I always felt like something had marked me, like a thread had been tied between me and something I couldn't see. Other strange things happened later in my life, things I still struggle to explain, but that night was the first, the clearest, the one that started everything. Even now, years later, I sometimes wake up suddenly in the dark with that same sense of shift in the air. I turn my head slowly toward the window, half expecting to see a face there. And sometimes for a split second before my eyes fully adjust, I think I do.